Well, actually, as far as I know, the Israeli regime hasn't been able to murder any members of Hezbollah. Yesterday, they murdered a family, a woman who was the principal of the school, and her husband and their maid, which is part of the Israeli tradition of just killing ordinary people all the time. And as we all see, every day they're murdering Palestinians in Gaza. Yesterday, they murdered a large number of people, even though there's a supposed ceasefire. No one in the West, in Western mainstream legacy media, or among diplomats and the elite seems to care. So on the whole, the ceasefire in Lebanon is still in place. So murdering three people is a big deal. But on the different fronts, it's been somewhat quiet. But they've been violating the agreement, not just by murdering these three innocent people, but also by bombing different areas. But still, it's a lot less than what we saw before. Iran is going to continue to put pressure on the United States. And Iran will not negotiate the nuclear program at all, which is a part of the second phase of the MOU, until the issue in Lebanon is resolved. And we saw last night 2 tankers struck in the Strait of Hormuz. That is a part of Iran's, although Iran hasn't accepted responsibility, but of course, we know it was Iran. The Iranians are going to put pressure on the United States, continue to put pressure on Trump until the issue in Lebanon is resolved. So Iran has 3 means of immense leverage. One is the nuclear program. Trump wants a deal. There won't be a deal unless Lebanon is resolved. And of course, the other issues as well, but Lebanon first and foremost, like Iran's assets that were stolen and were supposed to be handed over. The second is the Strait of Hormuz. The number of ships that pass through are much smaller than what we saw 4 or 5 months ago. And Iran is supposed to normalize the number of ships that pass through the strait in the second month, for the second month of the MOU. If the United States doesn't abide by its commitments, there's no reason why Iran should do that. Now, there's a disproportionate number of tankers that go through the strait compared to other ships, but still, the number of ships that go through are roughly 2/5 to 1/3 of what they were 4 or 5 months ago. Iran has that leverage too, the nuclear program and the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran has been using the ceasefire and the MOU to prepare itself for war. Iran has, there were lots of tankers in the Persian Gulf where Iran, which were trapped, Iranian tankers. And then as soon as the MOU was signed, all these tankers left for their markets in Asia. And ships have been going to Iranian ports. So Iran has been preparing itself militarily and Iranian society for further confrontation. Not that we want confrontation, but it's Trump and it's Netanyahu. So Iran has to be prepared for war. So Iran is more prepared for war today, militarily speaking, than it was at the beginning of the war. It's manufacturing new missiles with more advanced missiles, more advanced drones, expanding its underground network of missile and drone cities, command and control centers, and so on. Incorporating new technologies into the armed forces. And then, of course, we have today the ongoing funeral, which we saw yesterday too, that well over 10 million people attended yesterday, the largest funeral in human history, which is ongoing today in the city of Qom. You have a couple of million people there. It shows the high degree of popular legitimacy of the Islamic Republic. And no one can deny it anymore. But for the first time, this crowd, for the first time, is being somewhat acknowledged in the West for what it really is and what it means. And I would claim that Iran has much more popular legitimacy than Western regimes do. And these are, the evidence is in front of us. In the heat of summer, at a time when the country has been under economic siege for decades, It has just gone through 2 wars of aggression. Its infrastructure damaged, and a siege on Iranian ports. It's hurt the economy significantly. Yet you see these people come to the streets. And the depth of that popular legitimacy is another issue as well. That coming out in the heat of the summer, it took me 3 hours, almost 3 hours to get there. And we had to walk hours in the sun. And then it took me a couple of hours to get home. So I was exhausted. I had to go to sleep. So it just shows, the strength of Iran. It has the support of the public. Its armed forces are capable. All of this is leverage. All of this is leverage. And so ultimately, if the United States refrains from forcing the Israeli regime out of Lebanon, things are not going to get any better for Trump. The economic problems will persist, and at a time when the U.S. economy is in deep trouble, and he will not get a nuclear deal at all, despite the fact that he promised to get a much better deal than Obama did.
So Iran's tactics will likely then be to focus its pressure on the Strait of Hormuz as opposed to engage the Israelis in some kind of a direct exchange of missiles.
Well, if the Israeli regime starts, let's say, I can't say what the Iranian military strategy is, but no doubt if the Israeli regime, for example, intensifies the slaughter in Lebanon, strikes Beirut, or carries out other atrocities, that the Iranians will ultimately strike the Israeli regime. I mean, Iran was on the verge of firing missiles at the regime when, after Netanyahu bombed Beirut, when Trump then immediately gave the concessions that Iran demanded to get the MOU. And one of those concessions was on Lebanon. It was the first article, or the first part of the MOU. When you read the MOU, as I'm sure you've read it carefully, the first part is about Lebanon and about the region, which includes Gaza. But Lebanon was named because of this genocidal war that was going on. So I think that the Iranian military will definitely be used if his regime pushes too far. But if the regime pushes, Iran can also increasingly make the Strait of Hormuz more difficult for ships to use. So Iran can use its military, it can use its presence in the Strait of Hormuz. It has different means to put pressure on Netanyahu, both directly and indirectly through Trump.
And I saw the Americans made a proposal that they would do some partial sanctions relief on Iran in return for Iran not imposing any toll or fee on the Strait of Hormuz. From the memorandum of understanding, the Americans were supposed to drop the sanctions altogether, so they already seem to be attempting to renegotiate some of the terms in the memorandum of understanding. Now, I guess this was kind of predictable. They weren't just going to implement everything they agreed to, but rather do this gradual renegotiation. Do you see any scope for renegotiation or finding a new status quo, or what was this proposal just way over the top?
Iranians will not accept any renegotiations at all. They won't be flexible at all. I think that Ayatollah Khamenei in his statement, Ayatollah Seyed Mohammad Marandi in his statement with regards to the agreement, has made that clear, that he felt that, my understanding is that he wanted the agreement to be, let's say, stronger for Iran. And that sends a clear message to the United States that whatever we have now, the MOU, we're not going to be flexible about it. We've been flexible enough, more than enough. That's my interpretation of what he meant in his letter. And second, the funerals, I think, give the Iranian negotiators and the state, the armed forces, a clear mandate that the people are behind them, people support them, and so Iran will definitely be very tough. Now, the Iranians are not going to give up the Strait of Hormuz and control over the Strait of Hormuz, whether it's fees or control. I mean, it's not just about fees. Those are important, but it's also about security. Iran will no longer tolerate the Israeli regime using the strait or U.S. military vessels using the strait. And in fact, now that the Americans can't use the Strait of Hormuz for its naval vessels, all the planes, they have to use more planes to bring in supplies. And that costs, I've heard that costs like 4 times more than when they use ships. So Iran has already made it more costly for the Americans to maintain their presence in the region. So control of the Strait of Hormuz is not just a financial issue, it's a security issue. After all, we suffered as a result of a war that was launched against Iran primarily from the Persian Gulf region. I mean, the Israeli regime's capabilities are infinitely less than that of the United States. Even the Israeli regime's capabilities are dependent on the United States. Israeli aircraft that would strike Iran use American fuel. They're refueled in the air by American planes. So the Persian Gulf is the center, and has been the center of the aggression against Iran, and Iran's not going to accept that anymore.
What is the state, though, of the Strait of Hormuz? Because when Trump initially agreed to the MOU, he explained it as them only having 4 weeks left of oil. I thought that was brutally honest, but again, he was under great pressure to explain why he would sign such a document, which obviously should be interpreted as an Iranian victory. But given that the situation was so critical, how much is opened up since then? Because J.D. Vance also explained that one of the purposes of the MOU was to get the oil flowing and, well, how I interpret it, at least buy America some time. But how much has the situation actually improved?
Well, the thing is that the United States is being very foolish by opening their own corridor through the Strait of Hormuz. They're violating the deal. Because according to the MOU, Iran is in control of the Strait of Hormuz during the duration of the MOU. And by the second month of the deal, the number of ships that pass through the strait should go back to normal, meaning commercial ships. But since the United States is violating the deal, Iran has no incentive of doing that. And I would advise the Iranian government not to allow too many ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz during the second month. Because when the Americans are not abiding by their side of the deal, why should Iran do so? The number of ships that pass through have increased, and disproportionately they are oil tankers. But we saw 2 of those tankers, 2 very large tankers, I think super tankers, struck last night. And so nothing is for certain. There's a lot of uncertainty. So there is more fuel coming out. There is more energy coming out. And if you include the Red Sea and Fujairah, then it's not as high as it was before the war, but it is much higher. But it can go down very swiftly. A lot of the oil, by the way, was Iranian oil, because as I said, there were lots of Iranian tankers stuck in the Persian Gulf, and they were able to leave after the ceasefire after the MOU was agreed upon. So Iran disproportionately was able to take advantage of this opportunity. But again, I don't know what's going on now after the 2 tankers were struck, but Iran can easily decrease the amount of fuel that goes through, and the number of ships are still down. And that means all sorts of products, petrochemicals that are produced in this region, and other products that are produced in this region because of the low cost of energy, that they're not reaching global markets and the American market either. So, this is all up to the United States. If they had carried out their obligations in Lebanon, in the Strait of Hormuz, and repeatedly attacking and threatening Iranian leaders, Trump and the United States are violating the deals, and that's not allowed according to the MOU. So the Americans are violating, and the Americans have not released the stolen Iranian assets, which they are obliged to do so in accordance with the deal. So the Americans are pushing Iran to let's say limit the amount of cooperation that it or the amount of the degree to which it implements its side of the bargain. If the Americans had committed itself to the deal in full, the Strait of Hormuz by now, it would have had, I think, more than 100 ships passing through a day.
Yeah, I think the frustration for the U.S. is that given that the war failed, they hoped that the plan B would be simply to go back to the old status quo. But as we see from Iran's actions, it's not possible, and it's very hard for the U.S. to adjust to these new realities. But another area though where the previous status quo or the former realities are changing would be between the regional actors. That is. The divisions we see between the Arab states, Turkey, Iran. Well, some of this obviously is due to the US-led alliance system. Some is caused by conflicts unrelated to the United States. But how may, and I stress may, relations change after the war? We do not have a crystal ball. It's a lot of different variables at play. But how do you see the relations possibly improving between Iran, Turkey, the Arab states, or do you think they will remain more or less the same? Because this war, it's been an earthquake for the entire region, it seems.
It's complicated and it's difficult to really see the situation in the months ahead. Turkey increasingly needs Iraq because it is vulnerable to the Israeli regime, and the regime is making more threats against Turkey. And even though Turkey continues to cooperate with the regime, I mean, most of its oil, or at least roughly half of its oil, I think, goes from Baku through Turkey and to Tel Aviv, or to port, or to the Israeli regime. And so Erdogan Netanyahu has been doing him a great favor during the last 2.5, 3 years of genocide. And during the crisis in the Persian Gulf region, that energy continued to flow. But still, tensions are increasing, and he needs Iran. And so I think that is a strong incentive for relations between Iran and Turkey to improve. On the other hand, the 5 countries in the Persian Gulf that assisted the United States in the war, I think they are following somewhat different trajectories so far. The Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Qatar, they've mended their relationship with Iran to a degree. That's why during the last few ceasefire violations by the Americans, where they attacked Iranian positions and Iran hit back hard, they hit Kuwait and U.S. assets in Kuwait and in Bahrain and in Jordan, but not in these 3 countries. I think there's a reason for that. But at the same time, the Iranians just recently broke the siege on Yemen and the international airport in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen. And they sent a commercial airliner there, but the Saudis harassed it, from what I've read, and tried to prevent it from landing. And Yemeni air defenses apparently forced them to leave, but the fact that they would harass an Iranian civilian airliner is not a good sign. And the tensions between Yemen and Saudi Arabia are also on the rise. So what does that mean for the future? It's unclear. What is clear is that these countries in the Persian Gulf, these family regimes, they recognize that the United States won't protect them or can't protect them. And that when they hopped on the bandwagon to attack Iran, didn't go well for them at all. It went very poorly, and it continues to go poorly because the situation in the Strait of Hormuz hasn't normalized. And probably we're going to have some military conflict between Iran and the United States pretty soon over the Strait of Hormuz. Like, not massive, but probably there will be strikes and counterstrikes. I think the Americans will probably attack Iran, and Iran will strike. And if ships again fail to abide by Iran's rules, according to the MOU, then they will be attacked. So this is not good for those countries in the Persian Gulf. So they have an incentive to evolve their relationship with Iran, to have better ties with Iran, to tilt away from the United States. But all of them are very closely bound to the United States. Their elites study in the United States. The ruling families, spend a lot of time in the United States. They spend their summer vacations there. They have palaces and mansions and apartment blocks and investments in the West and in the United States, huge amounts. And I'm sure many of them are deeply compromised. Epstein, we've seen Epstein files where major figures, especially in the Emirates, are named. So it's difficult for to envisage what will happen, but there is an incentive for them to tilt away from the United States as the United States declines. So I think relations with Pakistan will improve slowly. Pakistan has very bad relations with Afghanistan, and of course there's India. I think that Turkey will need Iran more now than before because of the threats being made by Israel, despite the fact that, as I said, that Turkey hasn't done anything really against it. And, Trump just today, I think he said that Turkey is very faithful. Is more faithful than other countries that he expected to be faithful. Read into that, whatever. For me, that's not something to be proud of, but anyway. And with these countries in the Persian Gulf, I think it's a mixed bag, but Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the Emirates are more important than the other two, meaning the ruling families. So we'll have to see how this plays out. I don't have an answer to your question at all. I'm just sort of thinking out loud. But at the end of the day, if there's another conflict between Iran and the United States, these countries will not they will not be able to pretend that they're not involved or that they're neutral, because if the Israelis attack the Iran, their jets have to be refueled by the Americans, and those American planes will be flying over these countries. If the United States attacks again, the United States has a military presence in all of these countries. So if they really want to improve relations with Iran, there's a lot that they have to do.